Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Alderbrook. I think Alderbrook, inside the Olympic Ballroom, is the only place for sunshine in Mason County right now. So I want to welcome everybody to the Workforce Housing Summit. My name is Jim Morrell. I'm CEO for Peninsula Credit Union, and it is tremendous to see all of you here this morning. We have more people en route, and it's going to be a great day, great conversation about a really, really important topic for our community, for economic development, and for all of us. So today's a full day of dialogue about this topic of workforce housing, affordability and availability of that housing, and we'll build in throughout the day, and you'll see how this goes, a lot of opportunities for you to provide your feedback, input, thoughts, questions, along with what you're hearing from the people that are sharing and presenting with you. I wanted to also welcome, if this advances, it's not advancing. There we go, just the other direction. Wanted to welcome everybody watching on Mason Web TV. The general sessions today are being live streamed on Mason Web TV. We thank them for their support. The live video is available on masonwebtv.com and hcc.net/news, as well as YouTube and Facebook. These recordings will be available later today as well if you want to go back and review everything. So thank you, Mason Web TV and Dietrich Allen, for helping support that. Peninsula Credit Union, why us? Why are we doing this? We feel it's part of our role as a member of the community, as a member of Mason County's community. Several years ago, we were certified as a community development financial institution by the U.S. Treasury. And what that really means is that our intent and focus, our laser focus, is community development of an economically distressed community like Mason County, and working with individuals and individual families and households on a daily basis, trying to meet them where they are and take them to their next step on their financial journey. Economic development is part of that process. If people can get to and from work more easily with cars, regardless of what their credit score is, then they can retain jobs. Those jobs lead to them being able to buy things in our community, which employs more people and adds to that economic development. You all have been invited here on purpose. We have several community partners, which I'll recognize in a second, that identified you as being people who are critical to this conversation of housing, affordable housing, and workforce housing. So thank you for your contributions every day, but particularly for today in what you do to strengthen this community, Mason County. We have several contributing partners. The Shelton Mason Chamber of Commerce has helped us with registration and the event planning, so special thank you to Shelton Mason Chamber. The North Mason Chamber, the Economic Development Council of Mason County, and the Olympia Master Builders have also been really instrumental, again, in identifying who it is that should be in this room and taking part of this conversation. Without these partners, day to day, again, our community would not be who it is. And so I'd like to thank them for what they do every day, and particularly for bringing all of you together. Thank you. The Workforce Housing Summit is brought to you also by the Northwest Credit Union Foundation. The Northwest Credit Union Foundation is the foundation for our regional trade association, the Northwest Credit Union Association, which represents credit unions in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. We applied, Peninsula Credit Union did, for a grant to have this conversation take place, and the Northwest Credit Union Foundation delivered on that and said, yes, we think this is a tremendous idea. The conversations that are taking place today are going to be spread not only here in Mason County, but throughout that region. Some of the takeaways, some of your ideas, some of what we'll hear from the speakers are as relevant here in Shelton, Belfair, Hoodsport, Union, as they might be in a rural community in eastern Idaho or somewhere in Oregon. So know that as thought leaders for this county, your thoughts are going to be spread beyond that. One of the other things, and this is just the only real commercial I have for the day, is that the Northwest Credit Union Foundation supports what's now called the Bite of Reality. It's a financial reality fair that Peninsula Credit Union has done several times before at Shelton High School. We'll be doing this again on January 29th, but it's the Bite of Reality and the Reality Fair 2.0. So rather than paper and pencil, it will be a reality fair that is mobile app based. So students will be able to download the experience onto their phone, and we'll have them going through and introducing them to different parts of reality. Students are introduced to a job, a career, a family, maybe a spouse they don't know they have yet, or children, and the costs of insurance and the costs of paying other taxes to that. And they visit various stations throughout the financial reality fair, making decisions about what kind of car do they want, or what kind of home do they want to live in, how much food do they want to have, how much and how often do they want to go out for entertainment, and they keep on calculating their monthly budgets. So it gives them a monthly budget. At the end of the simulation, one of the things we encourage them is, and ask them is, how much money do you have left over to save and to put into your credit union or your financial institution? So this is coming up. There'll be a sign-up sheet at the registration table. If anybody here is interested in volunteering for that day, we need about 20 volunteers to assist us. These are fun jobs. Think of getting back at the car salesman when you go and purchase a car, and doing that at this experience, because it makes it much more real for the kids to have that. Any car salesmen in the room? Notice I did not pick on the realtors that are in the room. So if anybody's interested in volunteering, please let us know. You can sign up at the front. So back to the Northwest Credit Union Foundation, and again, why workforce housing. One of the pillars for what the foundation does and what we subscribe to as a community development financial institution at Peninsula Credit Union are these three tenets of economic empowerment. We believe that that we can empower people, we can empower households financially if they have an affordable place to live, by developing our workforce. And the last tenet there is small business success. We have many small entrepreneurs and many small businesses here in Mason County. If we have the affordable workforce housing for them to live, then those businesses can grow. Some studies say that up to 80% of economic development comes from existing businesses that are already present. So that's the focus, and that's part of the reason why we are here today. Some of you have seen this housing continuum, and we've highlighted the sections of affordable rent and affordable home ownership on purpose. Much of the affordable housing conversation has to do with homelessness, emergency shelters, transitional housing, publicly supported housing. Those are all critical, extremely necessary areas of the housing continuum for our community to address, and for us as a society and people to take care of. And we also hear a lot sometimes about the price of housing and what the market rates for that housing is. In the middle there are affordable rental and affordable home ownership opportunities. If you can imagine people shuffling along this continuum from left to right, and they get to that part where there's affordable rental and affordable home ownership, and they look over that chasm to what the market has to offer, that's an insurmountable leap for many households to overcome. And sometimes they fall in and they regress back into past economic behaviors because they thought they could afford something that they really couldn't. So this is our focus today, on our workforce and on affordable housing for that workforce. So affordability, just to kind of level set some definitions according to HUD, is that if people spend 30% or less of their monthly income on housing, their monthly budget on housing, then that's affordable. If they spend more than 30%, they're cost burdened. And if they spend greater than 50%, they're extremely or severely cost burdened. So when we're talking about affordability today, and all of the speakers have been prepped on this conversation, you want to keep these things in mind. We also are using the term workforce. And for the purposes of, again, level setting everybody on that workforce, we've defined that as individuals who are making, or households that are making between 60 and 140% of our area median income. The area median income in Mason County is just under $52,000. So that range between 60% and 140% of the most common household incomes in our county is about $31,000 to $72,000. And if you think about that, and you think about perhaps yourselves or perhaps the people that work in your organizations or people you know, this is the majority of our workforce is earning this level of income. So for today's discussion, when we combine affordable workforce housing, we're taking both of these definitions together, the HUD definition of what's affordable and then the workforce definition based on area median income. The U.S. Census put out some information, and I know the numbers down below are a little bit hard to read, but the orange bars represent those households that are cost burdened, which account for 32% of the households in Mason County. And you can see that on the left side of that graph, that as the income levels go down, the cost burden level of housing goes up. So just keep this in mind, 32% are cost burdened in Mason County. Over the past 20 years, we've seen an 88% increase in the median home value and home ownership costs. So over the last couple of decades, that's a pretty steep increase. Now if you own property, that's a pretty good thing, but it also adds to costs. When we look at rents, there's been a 20% increase in rents over the last 5 years and a 7% increase in hourly wages. So that household budget, when our team at Peninsula Credit Union and all of our staff who are certified financial counselors, community financial counselors, work with a budget, think of that as a fixed piece. Who did not want more of the pie at Thanksgiving or Christmas? But people's household financial budgets are fixed. You don't get more pie. You don't get to enlarge your pie plate. But the costs of eating that pie are more expensive. In these communities, the zero affordable housing rentals and zero low-income apartments, there's none that exist in these counties, these communities, Allen, Grapeview, Hoodsport, Skokomish, and Union. In fact, in Hoodsport, 100% of the households are cost burdened. 100% of the households that are renting are cost burdened, and 28% of the residents rent. So again, this is not to take the sunshine away, it's just to share a few bites of reality with you. But that's why we're here. That's why we're here, is to have this conversation today, to listen to one another, to listen to what our speakers have to present, to share what's on our minds. I'm sure that just in the opening that there was several questions or ideas or thoughts that came into your mind, or different, maybe some things you agree with, or perhaps some things you don't. That's really important for you to share with other people. In your program books, there are these spark cards, which is a cute way of saying, write those ideas, write those thoughts, write those questions and things that come to your mind down. At the end of the day, that's at 4 o'clock, a long time from now, there'll be a drawing with some prizes. So if you want to win a prize, the more cards you fill out, your opportunities go up. If you don't have enough cards in your program booklet and you see somebody sitting next to you that's not filling out their cards or willing to share, grab their cards if you have a lot of ideas, because that increases your chances to win, right? So use these spark cards generously and protect them if you want those opportunities to win some prizes. There's a lot of people here to network with, so I'd encourage you to mingle and get to know people. And most importantly, after we leave here today, there's an opportunity for you to act. In whatever way that makes sense for you, your organization, or the role that you play in leadership in this community, there's opportunities for you to do something. So there are several outcomes that we hope to produce from this summit today. One is that we have a couple of our grant writers here from Credit Union Strategic Planning. They're here capturing the dialogue, the conversation, and in about 45 to 60 days from now, we will produce a summary paper that will be distributed to all of you and to our community here in Mason County and to whoever across the country feels like they could benefit from the takeaways from this conversation. These spark cards, this information will be incorporated into that summary white paper, so it's your opportunity to contribute. There will also be feedback during the breakout sessions, and you'll be informed about how that process works when you go to the breakouts later this morning and this afternoon. These general sessions, again, are being broadcast live on Mason Web TV. Upstairs right now and throughout the day, Jeff Slakey from Daybreak and iFiber 1 News Radio, KMES, is doing one-on-one interviews with all of the 21 speakers that we have presenting here today. So all of those interviews will begin to be broadcast beginning on January 15th at 6:45 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. These are all opportunities for us to continue the conversation here in Mason County. So without further ado, I will stop talking and begin sharing with you some of the actual real experts on affordable housing. First person I will introduce briefly, and he is not here today. The 116th Congress is being convened in Washington, D.C., I believe being sworn in almost as we speak. Congressman Heck is our congressman from the 10th Congressional District, and he was elected first in 2012. Congressman Heck serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and is the only member of Commerce from the Pacific Northwest that serves on House Financial Services. At the start of 2017, Congressman Heck announced the formation of the New Democrat Coalition Housing Task Force. The New Democrat Coalition Housing Task Force's mission is to identify ways to get the costs of shelter under control and to push policymakers to start focusing on the strain that housing costs are putting on families and do something about it. In June of 2018, Congressman Heck and the other Housing Task Force members released a preliminary finding report on America's housing crisis. As Congress begins its 116th session, the report will be used to inform policy recommendations and legislative proposals to address the nation's housing crisis. Here's a message from Congressman Heck.
Hi, I'm Congressman Heck, and I'm sorry I can't be with you for today's summit, but I'm actually back in D.C. getting sworn in today. I did, however, want to take a moment to share with you why I think housing summit, but I'm actually back in D.C. getting sworn in today. I did, however, want to take a moment to share with you why I think housing is so important to all of us. To begin with, the home ownership rate is stuck at 64% after the recession and subprime crisis. And despite the economic recovery since the Great Recession, annual home ownership rates in all age groups were lower in 2017 than in 26. Now, we all know that owning a home can be an important source of wealth building. In fact, it's the #1 source for most Americans. And I want more of our neighbors to be able to do that, to reach home ownership. That's why I recently authored this report, Missing Millions of Homes. In our report, we determined that around this country, in order to stop the housing crisis, and especially to improve affordability, we need to build millions more housing units. Instead of seeing 15 to 20 million new housing units built last decade, which would have been enough just to keep up with demand, we only built 10 million new units. And frankly, that's putting a real strain on neighborhoods everywhere. So in Washington, D.C., we're working closely with a broad collection of stakeholders just to find out how we can spur that growth in a responsible, resilient manner. And that includes Mike Kinsella of Up for Growth, from whom you'll be hearing from soon. I'll do my part back here in the other Washington, protecting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and coming up with ways to prioritize affordable housing. But it makes me feel better when I'm in D.C. knowing that organizations like Peninsula Credit Union have their eye on this problem and want to be partners to come up with a solution. This summit and other gatherings like it are critical to us understanding the gaps that exist, the problems that have emerged, and potential ways to move forward. Housing is by far the largest expense in the typical family budget, and we simply must figure out how to make it more affordable, or our entire economy will be held back as a result. So thank you. Thank you for being a part of that conversation today. I look forward to collaborating with you on this down the road. Let's build the type of reform that allows every household to be financially safe and secure.
Oh, he's not here. He's a long way away. So our first in-person keynote speaker this morning is Mike Kinsella. Mike is the executive director of Up for Growth National Coalition, a diverse coalition of affordable housing and social justice advocates, environmental organizations, housing producers, major employers, urbanists, and transit associations who have joined forces to address our nationwide housing shortage. The Up for Growth National Coalition provides an expert forum to advance the public discourse around and promote supply-side solutions to our housing undersupply in a manner that respects and reflects the interests of many communities and constituencies affected by the crisis of decreasing affordable housing and availability. Mike leads all elements of Up for Growth's National Coalition operation, including policy research and development, strategic communications, stakeholder outreach, and federal, state, and local advocacy efforts. Prior to launching Up for Growth National Coalition, Mike led and served as executive director of Oregon Smart Growth, the first statewide affiliate of Smart Growth America's locust coalition of responsible developers and investors. Over the past 2 years, Oregon Smart Growth has grown to be an advocacy organization with over 30 developers, investors, and development industry firms that support state and local policy that enable and promote the development of dense, walkable neighborhoods throughout the state of Oregon that are economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable. Mike is a published author and speaker on urban development and housing policy and has over 15 years of experience in housing policy, commercial real estate investment, capital markets, and asset management. He has a Bachelor of Science in Community Development and Real Estate Development from the Tulane School of Urban Studies and Planning at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. He is a full member of the Urban Land Institute, where he is a member of the National Transit-Oriented Development Product Council. Mike also serves on the Workforce and Affordability Committee for the National Multifamily Housing Council. Please help me welcome Mike Kinsella.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. And I just want to thank Jim Morell's leadership in the community for pulling this summit together, as well as all of the wonderful community partners that he mentioned. It's without organizations and people like you that we can advance this conversation. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for having me today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Up for Growth, who I am, who we are nationally and here at a Washington State level, before I get more into the technical outline of our research presentation. And then finally, I'll really wrap up with some policy discussions and an opportunity to have a conversation around possibilities for Mason County and other places around the state of Washington, like Mason County. I'm actually very interested in learning from you all as we have this conversation. So by way of background, Up for Growth National Coalition is an organization that was formed in April of 2018 with a vision that communities across the country should grow for the benefit of every person. And our assessment as an organization is that communities are not growing for the benefit of every person, much for the reasons that Congressman Heck outlined. This lack of housing availability and affordability in communities that are growing has created a whole range of adverse outcomes to the health and well-being of communities across the land. Everything from access to habitable housing, lack of affordability, increasing cost burdens, increasing economic displacement, more cars on the road because folks are having to drive further and further until they qualify, and that of course creates adverse climate impacts with increased greenhouse gas emissions. CO2 is certainly increasing with autos as the dominant contributor. And so there's we believe as an organization, a clear nexus between housing and so many of our other public policy priorities from a national perspective and here in the state of Washington. Up for Growth is also quite different than organizations that I've been part of in the past. Oregon Smart Growth was a group, as Jim described, of developers who are very interested in transit-oriented and walkable, compact communities. But Up for Growth is a Up for Growth is much broader than this, because Up for Growth sees that our national housing crisis isn't just an urban issue. It's a rural issue. It's an issue that affects exurban and suburban communities all across the country. It's not just in California, which has a severe shortage of housing. And we see shortages of housing in places as small as Maine and Washington, D.C., and places in the southwest like Arizona and in the Intermountain, Idaho and Utah. All of these places have severe housing shortages. And so our organization is laser focused on tackling this challenge before us of a lack of housing availability and affordability. And we're doing it as a broad and diverse coalition, not just those who are in the business of producing housing. We now have around 60 members across the country, and who range from multifamily housing developers to single-family housing developers, chambers of commerce to environmental organizations, major employers and lenders who more and more are looking at this lack of housing as a real stymie from our communities being able to grow business and grow our jobs and really grow our workforce. Without housing affordable to a community's workforce, how can it grow its workforce? And really that's why we're here today, and I really appreciate this summit being pulled together. So our mission, bottom line, is to promote more housing affordable to all income levels in all sorts of places. More housing close to jobs, close to transportation, and close to desirable amenities. We simply aren't building enough housing in these places, and that's what our organization is focused on moving the needle on. So I'm going to dive into an overview of the crisis, a preview of some state-specific research that Up for Growth National Coalition is going to be rolling out in 2019, focused right here in the state of Washington, where we delve into what we call housing underproduction or housing shortage in the state of Washington, and what are those fiscal and economic benefits outside of just increasing housing availability and affordability that can come from policies that lead to these outcomes. So the first slide that I'd like to present is really a dichotomy of places around the U.S. We have places like Austin, Texas, Las Vegas, Atlanta, Raleigh, who have accommodated growing populations over the years by expanding outwards, by sprawling. These are termed by BuildZoom, a housing research shop, as expansive cities. And on the other end of the spectrum are places like San Francisco and more Seattle, which are termed by BuildZoom as expensive cities. So the policy trade-off is, historically, if you want to accommodate growth, but you want to maintain an affordable stock of housing to your growing community, expand outwards. Now that goes very much against our good legacy of growth management and leveraging infrastructure and community assets in Washington vis-a-vis growth management, where we're hoping to concentrate growth in growing communities and restrict, sprawl out into our agricultural and recreational lands through growth management. But in many cases, that has resulted in the housing stock becoming much more expensive due to the scarcity that's created. But we think that there's a conversation around a third paradigm, which is increasing density in a smart way in those communities that are high population and growing, and leveraging that growth to fund all sorts of affordability strategies for the entire state and the nation as a whole. Just stepping back for context, this is a map of the U.S. At the county level that illustrates the percentage of households that spend more than 30% of their income on housing, which are termed cost burdened. As you can see, California and frankly the entire West Coast is a sea of red, which represents more than 40% of households in these counties paying more than 30% of their income on housing. But the fact is, not every place is deteriorating at the same degree in terms of broader affordability. The coasts, which are high population growth areas, are certainly feeling the brunt of the housing shortage. Here in Mason County, cost burdening is also up. From data from 2010 to 2017, we've seen the cost burdening, now this is just for renter households in Mason County, increase from 46% to 51%. The increasing cost of housing also drives homelessness. We see in looking at the correlation between median gross rent and the rate, the share of population that is homeless has a high degree of correlation with Seattle having one of the higher rates in the country of homelessness with its rapidly increasing rent, which of course is demanding more resource. Housing starts haven't kept pace with household formation. Essentially, this is the driver, we believe, of increasing cost burdens across the country. When we look at, since 1960, how many housing units have been built nationwide relative to households, the country has produced about 1.1 housing units for every one household formed, which makes sense given that, not only do you have to keep pace with growing demand, but you have economic obsolescence and vacancy that you have to account for over time. So you actually have to build a little bit more than your household formation is demanding. That ratio decreased from 2000 to 2016 to about 0.98 units per household formed, which is still okay, but the trend was certainly going in the wrong direction. And more recently, since the global financial crisis, really, from 2010 to 2016, the U.S. as a whole has only built 0.7 new housing units for every one household formed, which means for every 10 new households formed, only 7 housing units were built. So it creates this game of musical chairs with the most able financially to compete for this limited stock of housing, and those that can't afford that housing are ultimately getting displaced. More locally, across the state of Washington, from 2010 to 2016, the state, similar to the national trend, has produced 7.5 units per every 10 households formed. And again, in Mason County, interestingly, the underproduction is even more pronounced. In 2000 to 2016, on average, Mason County has built 1.2 new housing units for every one household formed. But over the past 6 years, from 2010 to 2016, that ratio had dropped dramatically to 0.54 new units for every one household formed. So this is actually quite dramatic relative to the national ratio. So for every 2 households formed in Mason County, we're only seeing 1 new unit being built. And all of this adds up to a national housing underproduction from 2000 to 2015 of 7.3 million homes not built that should have been built relative to demand. And as you can see, this isn't just a Washington state issue, it's a national issue with 23 states around the country feeling certain shortages. And Washington state, though, is not quite as bad as California and Oregon, although it's not far behind. So in our analysis, we were able to calculate the price elasticity of housing supply. And what that means is, for say every 1%, a 1 elasticity would be for every 1 percentage point increase in housing demand, the housing stock increases by 1%. As you can see in California, we're systematically digging into a deeper and deeper hole every year, with every 1 percentage point increase in demand resulting in a 0.4% increase in supply. In Washington state, we're not keeping up either at a 0.84. So the trend is expected to get worse, not better, based on the current trajectory. Now, how do we get out of this? And, our organization really is interested in promoting not only high density, but all kinds of housing, contextually relevant to the communities that we're dealing with. The housing shortage in urban America has fundamentally very different drivers than the housing shortage in rural America. In Seattle and other cities like it, there are what the Obama White House in 2016 termed, artificial and accumulated barriers to development. This might be, everything from uncertainty and unpredictability in the development approval process to escalating direct costs that actually increase the price to deliver a needed housing unit, and therefore decreasing the amount of the supply that the building industry can deliver. In rural America, the challenge is, generally speaking, incomes are lower in rural areas than in urban areas, and the rents that are achievable in these markets are significantly lower than the rents on similar product that are achievable in more urban job center markets. But ultimately, to build a unit and get it out of the ground, the cost structure for a housing unit in a big city or a rural town for this like-for-like product is not dissimilar. And so this growing gap is essentially stacking the deck against rural communities from getting its share of market rate housing to serve relative demand. And so in our analysis, we really looked at, from a nationwide perspective, the map of the U.S., the map of states, using satellite imagery, looking at levels of development, and really allocating housing based on these three prototypes. Everything from single family to medium density, which could be anything from courtyard apartments all the way to multiplex apartments to more high density projects like towers and high rises that would be more appropriate for urban areas. And what we're arguing for in terms of policy to move the needle on our housing shortage is to move the incentives to encourage a more smarter approach to the distribution of housing. We're currently on a pace to if we build out all of our underproduction of housing over the next 20 years, according to the existing distribution of land use, on pace to consume 600,000 acres of land across the U.S. In many regions, in many places, that land doesn't exist. And so that effectively becomes the cap on growth that is exacerbating our inability to deliver housing into areas that need it. What we're arguing for is really shifting the scales and promoting more density in urban areas that density is appropriate so that we can deliver more units, consume less land, alleviate pressure on sprawl and on dislocation of populations outside of urban areas into other areas of the state. And the reasons for doing this is twofold. One, creating more jobs by resolving our barriers to housing. By our math, we're expecting to create 70,000 jobs over the next 20 years in Washington State by building out of the 225,000 unit shortfall. And from a fiscal impact perspective, doing so in a smarter way can add up to $25 billion of gross state product over the next 20 years. And again, on the more of the same conversation, by continuing down the path that we're continuing down, we're straining municipal finances across the state, infrastructure that is largely financed on the upfront for communities through assessments of impact fees don't account for the long-term operations and maintenance. And so moving down the path that we're currently moving on, we're actually in a position which is set up to be fiscally unsustainable. In other words, we're not generating enough in terms of municipal impact fees or property tax revenue to cover the long-term operations and maintenance expense on our infrastructure networks. So we really need to change the way that, not only do we need to build more units, but we need to change the mix of the types of units that are getting built in communities that need it in order to generate a more fiscally positive outcome. So look, high points on the Up for Growth state housing under production in Washington State report. From a Mason County perspective, I think we're rather from a more broad rural housing crisis perspective. We as an organization, we see really three major trends. One, USDA Section 515 Rural Rental Housing Program is on the verge of losing tens of thousands of housing units over the next 25 years because the program is shrinking and there's not enough refinance capability within that program to preserve the low-income, moderate-income housing in rural communities that this program is designed to support. Second, housing in rural America, like I had mentioned earlier, we have a general lack of shovel-ready land and a lack of financial feasibility for housing projects in more and more, given the increasing cost of housing at large relative to the rents that housing producers can underwrite to and create economically rationally. So look, Up for Growth is interested in engaging in this room in a conversation around this broader land use and being a part of this broader land use discussion from a state and federal level to really be a part of addressing our national housing shortage. We believe that increasing Section 515 funding is going to be a critical solution, and as an organization, we're focused on supporting. We're also interested in new models, public-private partnerships, bringing employers, funders, and housing producers together to deliver housing affordable to the workforce. So for instance, in Oregon, to some success, the state has created a portal that brings these stakeholders together to contribute unique assets, whether it's money, whether it's land, and the needs for workforce housing in these rural communities. In Tillamook, Oregon, the program has resulted in, Tillamook and other communities in rural Oregon has resulted in increasing creating a 72-unit modular housing project, a market rate complex priced for a company's employees, and affordable housing. And we believe that public-private partnerships more broadly are critical to really, enabling the private sector to develop a range of housing affordable to a range of folks in these communities. So I'm very interested in getting questions from the audience. I know I covered a lot of ground, and I'm very, very interested in discussing, learning from you and answering questions. So,
thank you, Mike.
Great, thanks.
Does anybody, want some water there?
Yes, thank you.
Good deal. Anybody have any questions for Mike right now? Heidi has a microphone, and we'll take several minutes for some questions. So, there's Don and this gentleman over here and up front.
Hi, Eric Shelton from Green Diamond Research Company. I'm just
Hi.
curious, what does your organization point to as the reason the market has not followed demand?
And specifically, Eric, what kind of demand?
So we know about range, more expensive homes, things
Yes.
moving in those brackets. If there's a market here, if there's an opportunity to get things out of the ground, out of profit, and make these things available, why is that not happening?
Right, right. So one is financial feasibility, and the market as a whole. There's inputs to the development process and the financial feasibility process from an income perspective. Investment capital is looking for a specific yield that they must deliver to their lender and their equity investor, and that yield is a function of how much money will the rental property generate, or would sales of for sale property generate relative to the cost of delivering the housing. And so there has been a real divergence between, there's been a real stratification of what's possible in places like Mason County versus what's possible in urban places. And I think to some degree, that's why we believe the urban and rural housing crisis is inextricably related. Because what's happening in the urban situation is that costs are certainly going up. You have a scarcity of shovel-ready buildable land in urban locations, which has led to really sort of a vicious cycle of less and less getting built. Costs are increasing. Those costs are financially supported in those urban locations, and those urban locations are essentially sucking up a lot of the investment capital that would otherwise be available to a whole range of communities across the country. So we really think the escalating cost structures in urban America is really exacerbating this shortage of capital available to suburban, exurban, and rural America. I would add to some degree that if shepherded appropriately, the Opportunity Zone program and Mason County does have a number of opportunity zones designated within the county, could be a source for new capital incentivized to go into locations other than urban locations for housing.
Okay, with Washington State, Mason County in particular, with the amount of recreation that we have in the recreational market with VRBOs and Airbnbs kind of taking off, have you done any studies on the impact of available housing that those are being taken away?
Yeah, we have not done specific studies on the effect of Airbnb taking housing offline for owner occupancy or for traditional renter occupancy. We've certainly heard the same anecdotes you've heard, and we've seen national studies on Airbnb and other vacation rental models. And what are those models' impacts on affordability writ large? I would be very interested in drilling in on a rural community like Mason County, because I think it's a very different dynamic than in a community like a city of Seattle. But no, we have not delved into that question. But we'd be interested in talking more about that.
Hi, Tim back with Modern Shed, where we support the private investment sector for higher density living in the private sector, meaning on one's own property. Is your organization doing any research into zoning laws and restrictions that currently exist on someone putting an additional dwelling unit or a dadu on their own property that they can then rent out either short-term or long-term?
Absolutely. We're very interested in that question, and a large part of our housing under production study really focused on, when I talked about incentives for changing the types of housing that we're building, I was really talking about changing the models around zoning and the artificial barriers to building alternative product types like ADUs or DADUs. And so right now, after having completed this body of work, we're focused on building out economic models that look at what are the impact on rent or on home purchase price given different regulatory or artificial barriers to delivering different types of housing. In our urban context, that might be what is the impact of a 6-month or a 12-month delay in building an apartment building on the ultimate affordability of that product. But also the land availability question is evaluated in that model, and answering that question of if we allow ADUs or DADUs or duplexes or triplexes on corner lots in single-family neighborhoods, we're building the models that are going to be the tools to allow us to answer those questions. So absolutely, it's an area of core focus.
I have an additional question. Are you working with the state of California, or have you done any research with the state of California, who last January just passed a statewide law saying that all residential property owners by right have the right to build an additional dwelling unit or a detached dwelling unit on their property as long as it adheres to setback laws and building code. Is that something that you guys are affiliated or involved with?
Well, we were supportive of that, of the Skinner bill in California, and we have a California state project where we do engage every day in Sacramento. California has been a real model from a state legislative standpoint on engaging in the land use discussion from a statewide perspective. And I think working collaboratively with cities is going to be a real key to that. We are also engaged in Olympia, and our second state project is here in the state of Washington. And we're aware that Representative Gregerson is looking at similar legislation potentially around accessory dwelling units. And there are a number of other efforts underway which we're tracking and which we're involved with. So yes, we're very much involved in that and aware of those efforts.
Hi, Deanna Rosenbach, North Mason Schools.
Hi.
I noticed that one of your slides that looked at the different ways, different kinds of housing that you're advocating, emphasize medium density housing. And I'm really happy to see that, because I'm wondering, has your organization spent much time looking at the research that shows the negative impact of living in high density housing on future earnings for high poverty kids?
That's interesting. So first, thank you for that question. And we think that a mix of housing options are what we need to be talking about, right? This isn't a one-size-fits-all problem, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. We believe that medium density, the missing middle, everything from cottage clusters on up to larger 8-10 unit apartment buildings are a core part of the solution, because they're a lot less expensive to build, but you can introduce density at levels that resolve that mismatch in property tax revenue relative to infrastructure maintenance liability challenge that we talked about. Now the problem is, if we're looking to solve this housing crisis, this housing shortage over the next 10 to 20 years, we've got to be solving it at scale. And so the attractive element of high density in, say, transit-served locations, in locations with large amounts of infrastructure like urban core or urban node areas in suburban locations, that's where we think a higher density solution is appropriate, but it's not appropriate for everyone. And then lastly, I would love to talk with you offline and get a copy of that or the site for that research you're referencing. I'm very interested in that question. Last question. Yeah.
Hi, I just had a quick question. Arla Shepherd Gold with the Kickback Sun. When you say household formation on your slides, what is the definition of a household compared to the housing units formed? Is that when someone moves out from their parents or starts a family, or what is
That's exactly right. It's a major life event. Graduating high school, moving out on your own, getting married, separating, death in the the major life events that create new quote unquote households. Thank you very much. Really appreciated the conversation and happy to answer questions offline afterwards.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for the questions. Those of you that spoke up are exactly why you're here in the room, is you're not shy in speaking up, and there'll be a lot more opportunities to do that throughout the day. Let me move us back down to where we're at. So our second keynote speaker is Emily Grossman. Emily is a policy and strategy advisor in the Community Services and Housing Division at Washington State Department of Commerce. Emily Grossman is, I already read that. She has worked in the areas of homelessness and housing policy development over 10 years. In her current role, she works to align housing policy throughout the agency, provides policy recommendations related to affordable housing development and preservation, and serves as the staff liaison to Governor Inslee's Affordable Housing Advisory Board. She has been with the Department of Commerce since April of 2016. Emily has a BA from the University of Washington and a JD from Seattle University School of Law. Please help me welcome Emily Grossman.
Hi, my name's Emily Grossman. As Jim said, I work for the Washington State Department of Commerce. I know some of you in the room, not many of you, but I hope to meet some of you today through your conversations, and thanks for having me. I'm just going to jump right in because I think we're a little short on time. So today I'm going to cover a little bit of maybe a deeper dive into Mason County and rural Washington in terms of a lot of the topics that you just heard about, defining what the missing middle is, what are the problems in terms of why is there a gap? Why don't we have this housing inventory? What are the barriers? What's happening at the state level that is intended to sort of mitigate or fix the situation? And then along the way, I'll give you some examples of local barriers that I've heard and local solutions to problems. I work with rural communities a lot. My colleague Ann Fritzl, who's in the front table here, and we provide an affordable housing short course, which is a training for local governments. It's a 2-hour training, and we cover the foundations of affordable housing finance, planning, zoning, and financial incentives. So we talk to a lot of local governments and a lot of folks in rural communities, and I hope I can bring some of their thoughts to you today. So these are a lot of numbers, but I just want to throw these on the table to get the conversation about Mason County started. The Mason County median sales price for a single-family home is $240,000. That's a 6% increase from last year. So the median home price is still increasing year after year here to quite a significant margin. The Mason County median family income. Now, I know that you heard the term area median income before, and that figure was about $50,000. There's a little bit of a nuance to that might be helpful for you in your conversations today, and that's sort of the breakdown in household types within that figure. So the median family income is $64,000. Median family income is a reflection of the median income, so that's the middle point. Half of families are above it, half of families are below it. Of families, so these are households that are comprised of 2 or more related persons. These households typically earn much higher than the households that don't meet the definition of family. So they're really going to be your sort of outlier in terms of prosperity. They'll have more income, they'll have more buying power than your other households. So those folks in your community are earning about $64,000. That's the median. Your median household income, which is your other figure for households that doesn't include these married families. So it's unrelated persons in single-family households, your seniors, just your individuals, and your unrelated persons who live together as roommates or whatever their arrangement is. They're only earning about $25,000 a year. That's the median income for them. So when you're thinking about affordability and missing middle, just think about these two groups in terms of your planning and the products that you need to be thinking about. These median, these households that fall within the median household figure that you see up here are going to need a significantly more affordable and smaller housing product than the folks who are in the other category. So there's a reflection of these here in these HAIs. So HAI is an indicator that realtors and other housing economists use to sort of set a baseline for affordability among different communities. So if your HAI, your housing affordability index score is 100, that means that your median household income is basically lined up with your median family prices. It means that 100% of the median income that you have will pay for your typical single-family home that's on the market. So it's affordable. If your HAI is above 100%, that means that your typical household has a little bit more of the income than they need to buy your typical home. If it's below, that means that you've got an affordability problem with your typical family trying to get into a home. So 100 is the standard. You're at about 135. So you're actually in a good situation relatively in terms of your families being able to afford your typical home on the market here in Mason County. Where you've got a problem is with your other households that I mentioned. So your single-family households, your non-family households, and of course this is in relation to the rest of the state, right? 135 is higher than what most communities have, what most counties have in Washington state. 38 is almost the lowest that we have in Washington state in terms of counties. There's only one county that has a lower first-time homeowner HAI than Mason County. So what this means is that your typical first-time homeowner, and that's a group that includes your single-person households. It's not just your family households; it's the whole group, including first-time homeowners. Their affordability is only 38. So they only have 38% of the income typically that they need to purchase your typical first starter home, and that assumes a 20% down payment, a 30-year mortgage at a fixed rate that is a standard rate. Your housing inventory is also something to note. So Washington State, as you heard before, we love single-family homes. We continue to build single-family homes. We prioritize them over multifamily housing types. About 77% of our housing inventory statewide and in Mason County is in the form of a single-family home. Your housing production over the past 5 years has been concentrated in single-family. So there has been some units, some housing starts that have been filed. The vast majority of them are for single family. I believe only 30% of your housing starts have been for multifamily housing units over the past 5 years. And so that's consequential because single family units, as you heard before, they're more concentrated. They're less expensive to build because the cost can be sort of spread and amortized over a number of different units. They tend to provide a more affordable situation for folks. So having that emphasis on single family can set you back. And that's happening statewide, that's not just here. So when I talk about housing affordability in Washington State, I've really come to think of it in terms of an economic failure, of a market failure. And those of you who remember Economics 101 from college will know what I'm talking about. It's when the market allocates resources inefficiently. So they're serving one part of the market and not another. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening nationwide. You know, the market is serving a certain group of folks. They're serving up single-family homes at a high price point. They're serving up large multifamily complexes that pencil out for developers because there are so many units involved. And they're not serving up other housing types for other income types. And there are a number of different reasons why this is happening. Rapid economic and population growth in other areas that sort of sucks up the capital, like you just heard. It's definitely a factor. Seattle's building quite a bit right now. They're building at about the same levels that they were before the recession. Other communities haven't been able to build as much, haven't been able to catch up, and it's because a lot of the capital and a lot of the builders are being utilized in that area, and there's not enough to go around. Competition for builders. What we saw during the recession was that when the home ownership and the housing production market tanked because of the crisis with the banks, we saw a lot of builders go out of business, and they haven't come back. Companies folded, they went out of business. The tradesmen went on, they found different jobs, they found different fields to work in that are less volatile, with less risk. They haven't come back. So now what we have is a big labor shortage in the housing construction market. We don't have the experienced journey level positions filled, and we don't have youngsters going into those fields because they're not really advertised. Trades in general aren't really advertised as a good opportunity for our high school kids in general. And certainly building houses outside in the rain, you know, in areas where there may not be access to public transportation, and maybe you're going to work for 6 months and then maybe you're going to be laid off for 6 months. It's not a very attractive prospect for a lot of folks who are in high school and thinking about career paths. And there are a number of efforts, I think, going on to get at that and fix that. The construction centers of excellence, their Governor Inslee's trade group that is really focused on thinking about how can we better market the trades to kids, how can we make the jobs better so that there's more uptake and more kids want to go into it. And definitely a large piece of this is going to be looking at the modular housing industry. When homes are built in a modular homes are built in a factory. So they're built on an assembly line, they're constructed inside, and then they're taken and assembled on site. So rather than building a house for 6 months out in the rain, it's built in a factory where it's warm and dry, taken to the site and snapped together in 2 weeks. That's definitely something we're looking at that a lot in the state of Washington. They're looking at a lot in Oregon, California. There's a lot of interest there, and I think a lot of opportunity. Rising costs of land and construction labor. Construction labor is expensive because we don't have enough of it. Land is expensive because there are restrictions on how much land we can use for housing. And land costs are just rising all over the nation. It's a trend, and I don't think that we're any different here than in other parts of the country, but we definitely have some extra pressures because of our protection of critical areas and natural resources within our Growth Management Act framework. So what do? We help the market deliver the products that we want. We do that through incentives, identifying and employing incentives, taxes, and subsidies to sort of entice the mix of housing that we want to have in our communities and get that developed. So again, what's missing? You've already talked about this, so I'm not going to cover it a whole lot. You've got your cottage housing, fourplexes, ADUs. These are all considered missing middle housing types. I know that in my conversations with a lot of city planners and administrators, that when you're talking about sort of incorporating housing into your existing growth management, urban growth area, you're doing infill development, and you've got a lot of issues in terms of non-conforming lots and folks who are already living there who might have some opposition to the way that their neighborhood looks changing or the way that their neighborhood feels to them changing. So these are all factors that can be dealt with through good design in these types of housing. So you can see this one over here. This is actually a fourplex. And there are 4 families living in that, but you can't tell by looking at it. It just looks like a single family home. Three out of 4 of these pictures are shown on Olympia's Missing Middle website. They have a really great website that they use to educate their community about missing middle housing. What is it? What is it not? What does it look like? Why do we need it? And these are pictures that they use to show examples. So what's the problem? There are a number of problems that are specific to rural communities that also affect urban communities, but there are a number that are specific to rural communities only. And I want to talk about both of those here. So there are 3 main categories of barriers that I hear coming up again and again, and that I've also read about. So I know that these are barriers in rural communities nationwide. The first is land use. If you have a growth management scheme that requires local communities to zone for housing at different density levels, sometimes some local governments are putting up restrictive zoning that inhibits the development of housing that is naturally affordable. So when you've got, minimum density requirements, a lot of setback requirements, parking requirements, that sort of make it so that you have to have a lot of space in between homes, or you have to have a long process to go through before you can actually get a home built. So a long timeline from the time that you can get things permitted until you can actually build and have a home ready for someone to move into. That all causes a lot of cost, and it causes builders to sort of default to larger housing types. Lack of rural market incentives. There are a number of different incentives that have been authorized by the state Congress that can be deployed in communities. Not all of them are effective in rural environments. For instance, the multifamily tax exemption, you have to have a population of 15,000 or more to qualify for it. But even in those communities who have 15,000 population or more, who aren't in a market like Seattle, have a difficult time deploying this incentive and getting developers to take advantage of this incentive, just because of the value of the property tax. In areas where property taxes are more, there's more value through a property tax and exemption than in other areas where property taxes may not be so high. Having developable land within the urban growth area, like I said, if you don't have developable land within your urban growth area, your 2 options are to extend your urban growth area boundaries and incorporate more land, which requires investments in new infrastructure to serve that new area. And also if the other option is that if you need to do infill, so you need to add units into the urban growth area that you already have, then you've got to be permissive about requirements, about housing sizes, about where they can be located, and the community has to be willing to accept upzoning or different housing types that they may not be used to seeing. Cost and finance. So you heard about this one before from Mike. A big factor is the cost of, for builders, is the cost of construction relative to the rents and purchase price. There is a limited number of builders that we have. They're building in Seattle because they get more bang for their buck there, right? They can keep their margins there. If they build here, they're going to have less of a margin to work with. They want to build expensive single-family homes, and they want to build large multifamily units. The types of missing middle units that we need in a community like this, where you have 2 to 4 units, are not as profitable. They're more profitable than a middle-priced single-family home, so it's definitely something to look at. But when you're competing for builders, you're going to have to bring something extra to the table to get them to come here and build it. Financial barriers to entry and down payment. When you don't have enough inventory being built and being placed on the market, banks can be choosier about who they're going to give a mortgage to. And so this means that in order to qualify for a mortgage as a first-time homeowner, you've got to have a good credit score and a good credit history. That's not always the case, especially when you're relatively low income or middle income. It's harder to kind of keep that clean slate on your credit report. So that can be a barrier. Also, we're seeing that banks are kind of undervaluing houses. They're using the same practices to value a house in the underwriting process than they've used for I guess in the past, before land values were so high and it cost so much to develop a house. So what we're seeing is that banks won't give a mortgage because the product at the end of the day they think is of less value than the cost of constructing it. So who's going to give a mortgage in that situation? The lack of construction financing for low and middle income projects, it's the same situation. You know, in order to guarantee that you're going to get that yield, get that profit, you've got to shoot for the higher level products that will bring the most money at the end, on the other end of construction. Infrastructure, you know, in a rural community, this is really your big conversation. Is what do you do when you don't have the infrastructure to develop new neighborhoods? And what do you do when you don't have the infrastructure to further develop your existing neighborhoods? Building sidewalks, bringing in transit, building new sewer lines, upgrading the sewer lines that you have. A lot of places don't even have a sewer. So having that infrastructure access to the improvements or to bring in new infrastructure, I think is your primary focus point, and it's something that the legislature is really working on this year too. I think they're finally understanding that that's a big problem. So these are some of the tools for missing middle housing that you might think about exploring today in your conversations. And if you have any questions about these, I will point you to my colleague Anne. She's the expert in these tools. She's in our growth management department and trains on these tools all the time. I'll give you a brief overview, though. Affordable housing incentive programs. These are programs that are authorized in the Growth Management Act for local governments to deploy. These are your tax incentives, your credits, your what are some other ones? Your planned communities, planned actions, bonus densities, inclusionary zoning, those sorts of things that local actions that local governments can take to incentivize builders to build by giving them some perks. Subsidies, tax credits, and land trusts. Subsidies and tax credits are your friends from the government. The Washington State has, obviously we have our Housing Trust Fund program. It funds housing at 80% or less, so it'll get the low end of your missing middle population, and they do loans and grants. The Washington State Housing Finance Commission issues tax credits. They're federal tax credits. They are very effective at getting private developers involved because they give them a very valuable tax break in their corporate taxes for investing money into low-income housing projects. Planned actions, you get to come in, you do your environmental issue statement up front. It's all sort of set in motion so that individual projects, when they're brought online, have a shorter process to go through in order to get permitted. It shortens the time frame, which reduces the cost. Infrastructure assistance. There are a number of programs that provide help with this. Community Development Block Grant, Public Works Assistance Account, USDA Rural Development, and bonds. You know, local governments can issue tax-exempt bonds to build infrastructure. So think about all of the possibilities around infrastructure assistance when you're planning for housing. And also communication. I think that overcoming that community opposition to upzoning and to sort of changing neighborhood characteristics can be overcome, as it was overcome in Olympia, through just a really great communications plan. Quickly, this is the universe of housing finance, at least in terms of government versus private. This quote, building affordable housing is a public-private partnership and the private only takes you so far. I think we all understand that the private market isn't delivering housing at 80% or less than the area median income. It just can't. But also the public only takes you so far because the funding that we have at the state level, we have to prioritize it for those households that have the greatest need. So technically our housing trust funds, for example, can can help build housing for households up to 80% of the area median income, but in reality, we're not funding housing for anybody above 50%. And the reason is because there's so much need at the bottom end of the spectrum, and we have a homelessness crisis, and the primary cause of homelessness is escalating rents and extreme cost burden in your low-income households. So that's where the legislature wants us to target the money. That's where it goes. That means that you've got to come up with solutions for the 60 to 80 and up. A couple of resources for you to consider when you're thinking about Mason County. This first one, Mason County multifamily housing, this is a snippet from a report that the JLARC released a few months ago. The JLARC, Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee, they're a legislative agency. They were asked to take a look at this incentive, this tax exemption that was created by the legislature in 2014. The only community that qualified for it was Mason County. And no, there were no takers. There was no multifamily housing built as a result of this tax exemption being available. And the JLARC, they're recommending to the legislature that you just let this thing lapse and go back to the drawing board. The primary reason they think it didn't work was just because there was unfamiliarity in the building market, in the finance market about how to use it. So there was a lot of risk aversion, no takers. There's a similar study that they're doing in 2019 that will be looking at the multi-tax exemption, so the broad tax exemption that's available, looking at how effective it's been and how it can be changed to be more effective. So keep an eye out for that. These, on the left side, these are snippets from the 2015 Affordable Housing Needs Study. Some of you might be familiar with that document. It was released, it was developed and released by Governor Inslee's Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and it's being updated now. It has county profiles that show, you know, your affordability, your housing stock, your projection for affordability 20 years from now. That'll be available sometime next year, so keep an eye out for that. And a couple of other efforts to keep an eye on that the legislature and other organizations are working on. The first is the Ruckelshaus Center is working on a Growth Management Act roadmap to Washington's future. This was funded by the legislature a couple of years ago. They got funding for 2 years to do a lot of stakeholdering and give the legislature recommendations on how this whole statutory framework in planning can be changed to help Washington meet its goals. So I'm sure they're looking at how to get more housing production, how to bring down housing costs. They're looking at all of these statutes. They're meeting with communities all over the state. Has anyone here been involved in one of those? Oh, wow, yay. And their recommendations are going to be due to the legislature next summer, so June 30th of 2019. And another thing that's going on right now is the JLARC. Keep an eye out for their multifamily tax exemption study. There could be recommendations in there to maybe bring down the population threshold, which would make it more useful for rural communities. And then there's through the Ruckelshaus Center, the Department of Commerce, which is where I work, we're working on a study with the Evans School of Public Policy. We've got some grad students who are working on developing a policy paper for us to help us identify whether the incentives that Washington State has authorized for affordable housing development are useful. So your tax exemptions, your credits, your impact fee reductions, all of these things that we allow local governments to do to incentivize affordable housing development, do they work? Have they worked, and are there states that are doing some things that we should be doing? That should be wrapped up by summer as well. I'm going to end there. I don't think I have time to take questions, but I'll be, okay, one or two.
My question twofold. One, what is the shortage? Have you calculated the shortage of construction
No.
And the second is, are any of these organizations working on research or the governor's task force looking at leveraging the certified U.S. Treasury community development financial institutions in the state, particularly not just the new market tax credits, but from the range of consumer lending coupled with housing for the mortgage readiness and construction and mortgage loans, especially from not-for-profit CDFIs?
Yeah. No, not that I know of. There aren't any direct efforts around that. There is certainly a lot of conversations and collaboration happening between CDFIs and state government around opportunity zones. That's just a subset of, and sort of related to what you're talking about, but not exactly what you're talking about. If you could email me, I get that to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and see if they want to make a recommendation around that in terms of, this is something that the governor should consider doing or having a state agency do.
My colleague Laura or I will provide that.
Great, that sounds great. And that also reminds me of one more statistic I wanted to drop because it relates to the question about VRBOs. 33,000 housing units in Mason County, over 10,000 of them are vacant. I looked that up last night, and I think that, and because your housing stock isn't very old, I mean, the majority of it was built after 1990. I would think that the reason why those units are vacant is either because they're vacation homes or VRBOs. Of course, that's just my guess.
The housing
In Mason County. Yes.
The housing element of the Growth Management Act has a requirement that anyone doing a comprehensive plan shall make adequate provision for affordable housing for every economic level.
Yes.
It's obvious that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what Commerce or the hearing boards, what possibility is there of using that to encourage cities and counties to do more?
I'll let Ann answer the question about the hearings boards and their role.
Thank you. Ann Fritzell from Growth Management Services at Commerce. So that is a requirement in the housing element, but we don't certify plans that they're compliant with the GMA. One of the reasons that we still have the Growth Management Act after all this time is that it's based on local decisions, local policy. We've completed our plan. We think it's in compliance, and it's up to locals to appeal it. So in King County, they have countywide planning policies that are very specific about affordability. And based on that, there was a community that wasn't planning for low economic segments at all. They were appealed and they lost based on the strength of the countywide planning policies. And because of that, they now have much more multifamily housing and an inclusionary program, which means if you want to build multifamily housing, a certain percentage has to be affordable to lower income segments. How does that?
Did it work?
Yes. Yes, it was Sammamish. They have an inclusionary program. They are building much more multifamily than ever.
But it relies on a local filing appeal.
Yes. So in California, there's actually a private right of action for folks to sue local governments when they don't meet housing goals. We don't have that in Washington State. What we have is sort of this, recourse that's available through the hearings boards. The Ruckelshaus Center is likely looking at this issue around how to sort of strengthen the role of Washington State in that process and making sure that plans are either certified or that their goals are achieved, but we'll have to see what they come out with. I know I've heard it discussed many, many times. Yep.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Congressman Heck, wherever you are, for your comments this morning, and thanks again for your questions. Emily and Mike, I know, will be around yet for a while today, so feel free to ask them questions. Please don't forget those Spark cards are another way for not only you to get your thoughts and questions in, but for you to win a prize at the end of the day. So we are going to adjourn the opening general session right now, and in 15 minutes, at quarter after, the 2 morning breakouts will take place in the Mount Washington Conference Center, which is up the stairs and to the right. There's 2 sets of rooms there. One is going to be talking about local opportunities, things that are taking place in and around Mason County already to help support workforce housing and the affordability of workforce housing. And the other is a session on data opportunities. So our own local data wonk, Andy Conklin, will be flanked by other experts around data, both in the real estate community as well as the workforce development community. So once a room fills up, we'll need to ask you to go to the other room. So that's sort of a clue not to dilly-dally. But at 10:15, those panel breakout sessions will start. We'll reconvene back here at 11:45. Thank you.